This is Stay on the Path, an introduction to exploiting Active Directory. Basically, this is going to be sort of a 101 talk of how to get the lay of the land in AD and then how to start exploiting it as a red teamer. So I'm Justin Palk. I'm a senior security consultant with Red Siege. I've been there for about 3 years. I've been doing IT and InfoSec for more than 16. Pen tester, I've developed a few tools, lots of CTFs. I had sort of a non-standard path into this field. I used to be a research scientist and software developer. I spent several years doing local journalism and state level journalism. And, then I was a security auditor last thing before I got here. In my off time, I brew mead and sometimes beer and write cosmic horror, Lovecraftian, Cthulhu, that sort of stuff. Okay. So what is Active Directory and why do we care? Okay, so most of you, I expect, are going to be fairly familiar with AD, but for those who aren't, AD is Microsoft's solution for basically gathering together, organizing, and managing information about objects on a network, users, computers, groups, controlling settings with things like GPOs, group policy objects. It also handles authentication and access control for all of those things. So in an assumed breach test, which is usually where we're going to interact with this at Red Siege, that's a test where the client gives us a set of credentials and usually a laptop or a workstation that is sort of our foothold host. And we run the test as if this is a user that we phished. And now we're trying to get from that, normal user to whatever target they want us to get to, whether that's, sensitive files held by their legal department or source code that their developers are working on, or just straight out domain control. So in that case, we live and breathe, and we just spend all of our time working in Active Directory on that sort of a test. Sometimes on an internal network test, if we manage to find or compromise domain credentials, we'll move into AD, but for us, this is really sort of our A/B test sort of thing. So what can we find in Active Directory? So Active Directory is organized into, the standard unit is a domain. You can have multiple domains that are linked together into a forest, and domains and forests can also be linked by trusts. And as I said before, it's got all sorts of information on objects, computers, groups, users. And so when we go looking in here, there's all sorts of things we're looking for. One is we're looking for sort of the general layout of the organization from an IT perspective. We may be able to go into Active Directory and see, oh, okay, all the admin accounts end in _AD, or, there are secondary accounts that have a number after the username that indicates what level of privilege they have. Or maybe we'll look and see, oh, okay, all these people are in this legal files group. Well, okay, those are probably the lawyers. And if we want to get access to the legal department's file share, we need to work towards, compromising one of those users or getting into that group somehow. Oh, look, all the dev machines are over here. Okay, this is what we're going to need to focus on. So we're going to look for ways to get there. So basically in Active Directory, we're looking for a map. We're looking for opportunities to compromise or impersonate users. And sometimes we're even just flat out looking for credentials, because even these days, I want to say twice this past year, I've found live credentials hidden in the description or comment fields of the user object. They're usually low privilege accounts. They may not get me a lot more access than what I've already got, but they're still there. They may give you access to something, always something to take a look at. Okay. So by itself, AD is not really, easy to look at unless you happen to be on a domain controller already. So we're going to need other tools for looking at it. The standard one we use is BloodHound. This basically is a tool. You run a companion tool called SharpHound, and it will go out it will connect to one or more domain controllers, and it will slurp down all the available data on, the domain or the forest you specify. You'll find all the users, the computers, the groups, your GPOs. It'll try and find sessions. That's gotten a little harder lately. We'll talk about that later. And then it'll analyze it. It'll look at basic parameters first, things like, where does this account have local admin? If it does, what groups is it a member of? Does it, when's the last time that it logged in? The last time its password was set? Does it need a password? When is its password set to expire, or does it never expire? Is this computer authorized for delegation, unconstrained or constrained? And then once it's got all that, then it'll go through and it'll basically build a giant graph of all these objects and how they are interrelated. And it'll tell you that, okay, this group has all these people in it, and this group has these permissions over these computers over here, and one of these computers is enabled for unconstrained delegation. And so basically, given a starting point in the domain, you can go through and search for, is there any way that I can get from this thing, this computer, this user, this group, to something that, is one of my targets, another group I'm trying to get into, a domain admin account, something like that. So we'll end up running this very early in a assumed breach engagement. Now, the caveat is, in the process of slurping down all this AD data, it's very noisy. So if you're on an engagement where stealth is one of your objectives, you're going to have to be very judicious about how, if at all, you try to use BloodHound, because a lot of places now have alerting set up on excessive numbers of Active Directory queries or LDAP connections. And so they will notice you, doing this. Next up, we've got AD Explorer, which is part of Microsoft sysinternals. This is, an older tool, but it still works. It's a Microsoft signed binary. And basically what it does is it lets you connect to a domain controller and sort of browse your way through Active Directory. And I should have mentioned this about BloodHound. Unless your domain admins have taken extraordinary steps, anybody should be able to run BloodHound. Anybody should be able to run AD Explorer and get information out of it. Any domain user should have access to most of this information. So AD Explorer, unlike BloodHound, it's really just a browser. It doesn't do any sort of analysis. So if you've got particular things you're trying to drill down on, it can be good. You can run it using some sort of proxy tool like Proxifier on a local Windows VM and tunnel it into the client network and connect to AD that way. You can also, with AD Explorer, you can generate a snapshot of Active Directory and download that, and there's a tool that will convert that snapshot into the JSON files that BloodHound needs to do its analysis. It's going to be a somewhat more limited set of data that gets pulled into BloodHound because AD Explorer doesn't do sessions and it doesn't do GPOs. But it'll give you a lot of the basic layout and a lot of the connections. Also, I should have mentioned, I will put these slides in PDF form up in Discord after the talk. The notes sections on the slides will have links to any tools that I mentioned. Or if I, mention tool, but I forget to mention its name, it'll be in their tool. It'll be in there too. So let's see, the third tool. This is one it's not new, but it's new to me. It's called Group3r. I haven't actually had a chance to use this on an engagement yet. But whereas BloodHound will, build up a graph of all the relationships between things, Group3r will query Active Directory and it'll pull down the GPOs and it'll start looking through the GPOs themselves to see if there's anything interesting in there. Maybe there's a password attached to a starting a service binary. Maybe there's a startup script or a logon script that points to a file that doesn't exist anymore that you might be able to replace. And now you log, when somebody logs on, they get they run your malware or whatever it is you're running. Maybe there's an installer that it tries to trigger that doesn't exist, and you can do the same thing. So like I said, I haven't gotten a chance to use this yet, but it looks interesting. Might get a chance to test it in a week or two. So, and then we've got Certify and Certify. These are specific for looking at Active Directory certificate services and looking for the sorts of vulnerabilities that SpecterOps described in their white paper, Certified Pre-Owned, basically all the ESC number attacks. And this is, the easy button right now. We still see it in a lot of places. And it's very common to find, a misconfigured template that literally allows you to go from a domain user to a domain admin in one step, a 5-minute directory, full compromise of the domain. And a lot of places aren't monitoring what certificates they're issuing, so they won't even see this happening. But Certify and Certify is a Python-based tool. Certify is a .NET assembly you could run via Cobalt Strike in a BOF or some other C2 thing that supports running .NET tooling. But they've got things set up to variously search through ADCS and find the vulnerable templates, and then also mechanisms to actually exploit them once you've found them. Okay, so we've taken a look at Active Directory now. We've sort of gotten the lay of the land. We know where we're trying to get to. We know if we've got any easy routes to escalate ourselves. How do we actually exploit those? So like I said before, Certify and Certify, they don't just look at stuff, they also let you exploit it. I'm not going to go a whole lot further into this, but this is showing exploiting an ESC1, which is sort of the lowest level of attack, where I'm making a request as my compromised user, Wilson P, and I'm specifying a second user on that certificate, the domain administrator account, and you can see below it prompts me for my password, requests the certificate, gets it back, and it says, hey, I've got it with the administrator account on there, and then it saves me. A little bit of transforming that into a different certificate format. I can take that over to Rubius and get myself a Kerberos ticket for administrator and go wherever I want in the domain. I should also note, BloodHound in its most recent versions has added the ability to look at ADCS, so it can also find these attacks, but it has no mechanisms for doing any sort of exploitation. I mentioned Rubius a moment ago. Rubius is our Kerberos Swiss Army knife. A lot of the AD misconfigurations that you or an attacker is going to want to exploit are going to involve Kerberos manipulations, getting tickets, capturing tickets out of memory, requesting new ones, authenticating with certificates, that sort of thing. Rubius does all that. It also supports Kerberosting and AS rep roasting. So basically, two different mechanisms for getting Kerberos to give you a hash that you can try and crack offline. You'll end up using Rubius quite a bit. PowerView and SharpView. These are more often used for actually manipulating things inside of the Active Directory itself. PowerView is the PowerShell-based tool that was part of PowerShell Empire. SharpView is the re-implementation of most of PowerView in a .NET assembly. So these tools will both let you do things like query specific information out of Active Directory. Here we see I'm querying for the top level domain object and getting back a bunch of that information. They will let you do things like reset a user's password, set parameters on Active Directory objects, pull information on parameters in Active Directory objects that may not be exposed in BloodHound. add people to groups, that sort of thing. And then there's Impacket. Impacket is a Python framework for interacting with Kerberos and Active Directory for the most part. There's a few other things in there too. It's got some of what Rubius does. You can use it to request tickets. You can use it as part of a resource-based constrained delegation attack chain. It does some of the things that PowerView and SharpView do in terms of being able to pull down information, set some attributes on Active Directory things, create new computer objects. And it's also got a couple of shell type things, SMB exec and PS exec in there. So once you get access to a host, you can get a toehold on it and start operating. Okay, so we've gotten the lay of the land. We sort of know the tools that we're going to use most of the time. There are specialized ones for other particular attacks, but we're not going to dive too deep into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about exploiting common weaknesses. These are things that we have seen on our tests, often more than once, and just sort of the basics of how do you exploit them, how do you leverage them. So this is one that so all these are going to be things shown in my test lab, but they're replicating things that I have actually seen on a test. A test last year, I found that the domain users group had generic write control over a GPO. This GPO was old enough to drink. It had probably been forgotten about by the admins, and they had just never removed it, hadn't thought about it in God knows how long. But it was applied to a large number of computers in the domain. So having generic write over a GPO that is applied to computers basically gives you full control of those computers. You can use it to enumerate information, you can execute code, you can add somebody to the local admins group, you can modify the firewall settings, all sorts of fun stuff. That said, because it has that level of control, and unless you spend a lot of time looking at all the machines that GPO is applied to, these can be sort of risky to exploit because you don't know what sort of unintended consequences there may be. There may be some machine that has a very particular configuration that, you do something to the GPO, it knocks it out of whack, and suddenly this business critical host goes down. So as a general rule, I would not recommend trying to exploit this. In this particular case, the client they really wanted to show management what the impact of this could be. They had a fairly substantial informed appetite for risk. And so we worked out a way to go ahead and exploit it. Basically, I just ran I set up a small PowerShell script to run on startup that would just gather us a little bit of information about the host and send it back to a web server I controlled. Within a few minutes, I was starting to get pings back from various machines in the network. We cut it off when we had gotten about 150 PowerShell alerts in their SIM. And that was enough to show impact, and they're like, okay, you're drowning our blue team right now, so we're going to cut this off. It's like, okay, cool. And I have to admit, it was a lot of fun, but I wouldn't normally do this. There is a tool, I think it's Sharp GPO. Again, it'll be in the notes section, that basically allows you to modify GPOs. It's got a few canned things for installing a script, creating a new local admin user, that sort of thing, which is what I use to exploit this. The one caveat here is, unless you have a DA account on a domain controller, you're not going to be able to undo this with Sharp GPO. So you'll need to be on a DC as a DA and go through the GPO management tool to find whatever you did and delete it, or you'll need to tell your point of contact, hey, you need to delete this thing, or you need to disable this GPO, or whatever it is, because you're probably not going to be able to do it yourself. Excessive permissions. This is something we see a lot of. This is one that I saw about a month ago, and it started off, looking just sort of odd. I was on a 2-week AB, and I'm going through and I'm searching shares, and I find the credentials for this developer admin account, which for some reason is in the account operators group. It's one of only 3 accounts in this group. And I have this notion that account operators has some sort of, elevated access, but I'm not really sure what. So let's see. We'll go to Microsoft and we'll see what account operators does. Okay. The account operators group grants limited account creation privileges to a user. Okay, so I can create new accounts. That's cool. What else can I do? Members of this group can create and modify most types of accounts, including accounts for users, local groups, and global groups. Oh my. So this is my section of the BloodHound graph for my very small lab domain. And you can see that the account operators group has generic all over tons of stuff. Basically, account operators is about 1 step shy of DA. You have full control over all users, all computers, all groups, basically anything that's not tier 0. You're not allowed to touch any of that. So if you're in the sort of environment where they don't necessarily want a full domain compromise, but they've got some specific thing they want you to get at, account operators will probably get you there. Okay, so how do I exploit this? Well, I've got generic all over a bunch of user accounts. I could just reset someone's password. That, absolutely works. It can be a little bit noisy because the next time that person goes to log in, they won't be able to. They'll have to go to the help desk to get their password reset. And if they're the suspicious sort, maybe they take a look at when the last time their password was changed or the last time they logged in. And when they see those times don't match up with, their recollection of when this happened, that could trigger an investigation. If they're not curious at that point, well, you've lost access to the account. You're going to have to change the password again to get back in. Eventually, this will, attract attention. So maybe we find another way to do something here. Since we've got control over a bunch of computer objects, we can do resource-based constrained delegation. So there's a couple different types of delegation in Active Directory. The 2 main ones that we encounter are either unconstrained delegation, which basically says this computer or this user is authorized to act on behalf of any other user in the domain, or to any other machine. Then there's constrained delegation, which basically says this computer, this user is allowed to act on behalf of anyone else in the domain for the purposes of I'm sorry, I can't talk this afternoon. For purposes of accessing a particular service on a particular host. So basically, if you can set this up targeting your domain controller, you can absolutely compromise a domain that way, unless they've taken steps to, like, say, put their domain admins in the protected users group, in which case delegation doesn't work for them. But you could use this to compromise a domain controller. I don't have access to that. That's a tier 0 object, so I'm going to do something else. But we'll get to that. Some prerequisites you need. You need 2 computer objects, one of which that is configured for unconstrained delegation and that you have control of, so that you can basically say you're allowed to use your unconstrained delegation on behalf of this other machine. Then there's that other machine you control that you need the password for, because you're going to need to authenticate as that machine. And what we see here is I'm using SharpView to get that top level object again. And in particular, what I'm looking for is that MSDS machine account quota object or property. Basically, that property defines how many computer objects a bog standard domain user can add to the domain. Because if you add a computer to the domain, you are the owner of it. you set the password for it. So this is an easy way to get that second computer that you need to make an RBCD work. Okay, so here I'm using Impacket's add computer script to add that attacker computer. In this case, attacker $. You got to have the $sign on the end of the name. I could have specified a password on the command line. Instead, I just let Impacket generate a random password for me, and then I save that because I'm going to need it later. So then I go back to BloodHound, and I'm trying to figure out what host do I want to target with this. And I find a host that is enabled for unconstrained delegation. So basically, I can take this machine, get constrained delegation on it, get a beacon or get a shell running on that in a constrained environment, but then I can use it to try and get an unconstrained ticket that I can take anywhere that I want in the domain. So this is sort of a 1-2 kind of a thing. Okay, so who do I want to target? In my domain, I've got 2 DA accounts. There's the built-in administrator, and then there's J. Angleton DADM. I'm going to target the J. Angleton account and see if I can, vault myself all the way to domain admin from here. So this is the resource-based constrained delegation attack itself. Impacket has a script for doing this itself. There are other tool chains you can use, including Rubius to do in here. But basically, what I'm doing first in the top line is I'm looking to see, does RSL Web, which is the machine I identified up here, is RSL Web already allowed to act on behalf of anything else in the domain? No, this is empty. Okay, so I'm not blowing away any existing configurations. That's good. And then the next one is me actually performing the attack. And I'm using that same RBCD script to delegate from the attacker computer that I created to the RSL Web server that I'm attacking. And as we can see, we modified the delegation rights, and now I can, via an S4 a self-for-you2 proxy attack, I can impersonate users using my attacker computer account. That'll be good for the RSL web server. Using Impacket again, I'm going to get a service ticket. I'm going to ask for an SMB ticket for RSL Web, impersonating that admin account, J. Angleton DADM there. And it's real simple. You request the ticket, request impersonation, and it just saves it for me in a file on my Linux, my Kali testing VM. This stuff is all, in this case, I'm running this on a box that I've got implanted in my test lab, but you could do this through something else running through a beacon using like proxy chains through a SOX proxy on your Cobalt Strike beacon or your Sliver beacon or something. Okay, so now I'm going to use the SMB client in Impacket, and I'm going to connect as J. Angleton domain admin. And we can see here that, I can access the C $ share. So good. I've got admin access to this box. I skipped a step in here. I uploaded a beacon object and I used SMB exec to execute it. And then through that beacon, I loaded Rubius, and I used Rubius to list the available Kerberos tickets on the box. So if we see here, we've got Howard B. SA, that's a server admin. We've got a Kerberos ticket for him, so we could yank that ticket and impersonate him across the domain. We've got a Kerberos TGT for the host itself. And then for J. Angleton, we've only got this SMB ticket. So we can't take that anywhere. We can't do anything with it because it's locked to this service on this host. Okay. So how do we go about fixing that? I was having problems setting up any sort of coerced authentication in my test lab. Things like the print, like using print spooler or the printer bug, other things like that. What you could do in a network where that is properly set up, or improperly allowed or misconfigured, basically you go to your RBCD host, you coerce another machine, say a domain controller, to try to authenticate to that host you've already compromised. And when that authentication takes place, you'll get that Kerberos ticket granting ticket there that you can then pull out, because that host that you've compromised, which has both constrained and unconstrained delegation, is going to cache that Kerberos ticket so it can use it with unconstrained delegation. So it can generate or request more tickets for that user to whatever else it needs to talk to. Like I said, I wasn't able to get coerced authentication working. So instead, we're going to be replicating a situation where J. Angleton domain admin has, for some reason, logged into this server and there's a session there. So what we're seeing here is, this is on my domain controller. I'm logged in as that J. Angleton domain admin account. I do a who am I? And then in the file explorer, I just go to the $share on RSL web, which prompts the DC, on my behalf to make a request for a ticket on that host and sends it over to RSL web. We see now that J. Angleton domain admin has a Kerberos ticket there, so I'm going to be able to pull it. And I take that ticket, extract it using Rubius, take it back to my Kali box, and I'm able to use it with secrets dump on my Kali box to target the domain controller and start dumping secrets out of ntds.det. And that's sort of a full chain of, logging in as a user who's got one misconfiguration that you can leverage into others. One note I will make here, the sessions thing, it used to be easier to do this. It used to be that among the other information you could get, any domain user could ask any other machine in the network, hey, what sessions do you have running on you right now? And they would respond and tell you. So at that point, BloodHound could, as part of its data gathering, it could, just query the network and say, hey, who's got what sessions on what box? And it could tell you that. And so you could say, okay, that's the machine I need to exploit if I want to get this user's ticket. Recently, I'm not sure how long ago, Microsoft changed it so that you can only do that if you are logged into the host or if you have administrative access to that host. So it's a lot harder now to find machines that have sessions that you want to capture, because you more or less have to, unless you've already got an admin account for that box, you more or less have to log on to it and see what's there. But you can make educated guesses about what sort of machines might have interesting users on them. Jump boxes, for example, are always a good choice. And okay, I guess we'll move to the Q&A section. If anyone has any questions.
Yes, hold on, I'm coming. We were both in the backstage going, oh shit, it's done.
I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. We were having it was me and Brandon and Crystal and we were just talking about DEF CON and stuff, and then we're like, oh yeah, doing this, and then I saw the questions slide and we all panicked.
Sorry, man.
I was like, I never pressed that webinar button quicker. I was like, get in stage. Yeah, we got let's see, there's a couple.
We got a couple in.
Wait, those aren't yours.
Okay.
Not in Zoom, but there might be some stuff within Discord if you want to answer live, or you can.
Let me take a look in there.
Yeah, because we got some time. Kathy isn't due for another 20 minutes, so you either take it there, or we can riff for a while until she gets there.
I mean, I can. Gotta scroll down to something that's current.
Yeah. Somebody, so in YouTube, and I don't remember which part of this. Maybe you can suss this out. But I don't know if this was like more of a comment. August said, whatever you were talking about, he said, tried this on my last engagement, but I didn't have any SPNs, and they had changed the machine count quota to 0 last day of op, so too late to Kerberos or find other SPNs.
Yeah. And I mean, you will encounter environments where they've locked it down. They've set it to 0, or maybe they've set it to 1. God, who was it? I think Corey, or maybe it was Jason on a recent test, found some place where that value had been set to 500. So any domain user could add 500 machine accounts to the domain. That said, there are other controls. I'm not sure what they are, but I've also seen environments where it's set to that default value of 10, but you go to add a computer and it still tells you, nope, you don't have permissions for that. So, the MSDS machine account quota is a good sign, but it's not a lock.
This is actually more of a compliment for everybody involved. One issue from these virtual conferences is that I have a ton of open web tabs that I need to read carefully afterwards, which is good. Yeah.
I see we got a couple questions here in Discord. I'm checking on.
Go for it.
iNull0 is asking, how does sysinternal's AD Explorer compare to something like ADSI Edit? Is this something that can be run by a low privilege user? A lot of larger organizations block AD admin tools through software restriction policies. So I haven't used ADSI Edit, so I can't really compare them. However, any domain user, unless the admins have taken steps to block it, any domain user should be able to run AD Explorer. I have encountered environments where, they've got a really aggressive app blocker policy, and that's just not on the allow list, so it's just not going to run. I saw an interesting talk a couple of weeks ago talking about basically how to hide stuff in AD and basically prevent your standard user from looking at most data in Active Directory. That would block that. That would block BloodHound, Group3r, querying things through PowerView or SharpView. But yeah, organizations can block this, but usually they don't. I see another one here. This is from Joel M. Leo. Have you found organizations that control object visibility via list object mode present additional challenges to assessments and attacks? That may be what I was just talking about, the hiding things in Active Directory so people can't look at them. I've not actually encountered that on a test yet. However, just knowing how we run most of our tests, that would make our lives hell. I don't know how much harder it would make things for users and administrators, but it would make my life as an attacker a nightmare.
You hear that? I'm going to clip that for later, and that's going to be the clip. What makes Justin's life as a red teamer a nightmare?
Yeah.
That better have 6,000 views. Damn it. You guys are always asking, like, what do I do to frustrate the red team? What do I do to frustrate attackers? He told you, literally right there.
I got something here. This is more of a comment from Rotary Drone. Good use case for staying off the land. If endpoint restrictions are too tight, just proxy the tools over SOCKS. AD Explorer over SOCKS 5 works great. Yeah. I mean, Jeff McJunkin is a big proponent of this. Touch the initial access host as little as possible and do everything you can to just run tools via proxies, because at that point, the only thing that they're going to see is the network traffic. And so now that's, everything is dependent on how they've got their network monitoring rules and network monitoring stacks set up. You're not going to have to worry about burning things, getting caught in memory on the box. So yeah, I like to run a lot of my stuff through proxies. Not everything, but a lot of it. Just because we almost always end up running at least a Cobalt Strike beacon on the host to give us our proxy. So, but we've definitely looked at, how can we set up a tunnel type, a tunnel using some sort of SSH-based payload.
TriMark Vision is the next evolution in the identification of security issues across all your Active Directory environments. The TriMark Risk Score is based on real-world expertise of TriMark's industry-leading Active Directory and Microsoft Cloud security experts. Most importantly, TriMark Vision helps you to answer the questions facing your Active Directory security posture today, such as what risk do I have in my environment? What actionable steps can I take today, tomorrow, this week to best mitigate my risk of an attack on my Active Directory? What should I be most concerned about within my Active Directory forest where it concerns potential attack vectors? What is the current security posture of all my AD forests? TriMark Vision, visibility at the speed of operations.